It is the morning of June the 3rd, 1839, and a man is standing on the shore at Humen, near the mouth of the Pearl River, watching the ocean turn the color of mud. Workers below him are shoveling something dark into enormous trenches dug into the beach, trenches flooded with seawater, salt, and lime. And as each shovelful hits the water, it hisses and dissolves and drains out into the tide. What they are destroying is more than 1,000 tons of opium. And what he does not yet fully understand, standing there in the heat with the sea going brown at his feet, is that this act will bring the warships of the most powerful navy on earth to this exact coastline within a year, that it will humiliate the oldest continuous empire in human history, and that the entire catastrophe about to unfold began with something as harmless as a cup of tea. He is a servant of the Chinese state, one of thousands, and he has been told this is a victory. The foreign poison is being wiped out. The trenches are the proof. But the men who sailed that poison up the river did not do it for the poison. They did it because they needed something to trade, something the Chinese would take in exchange for the one thing the whole of Britain had become desperate for. Not gold, not silver, leaves. Dried leaves in wooden chests that steeped into a brown drink an entire nation could no longer live without. The tide keeps pulling the ruined opium out to sea, and the clock is already ticking. The man on the shore just can't hear it yet. But the story of tea does not begin on that shore, with an empire about to be broken. It begins almost 5,000 years earlier, and half a continent away, with a legend about a leaf and a pot of boiling water. The Chinese tell it like this. The Emperor Shennong, a mythic ruler and healer, is sitting beneath a tree while his servants boil water to make it safe to drink. Because even then, people understood that raw water could kill you. A breeze moves through the branches above him. A few leaves drift down and land in the pot. The water darkens. The emperor, curious rather than cautious, drinks it and feels something sharpen behind his eyes. A clean, bright, wakeful lift he has never felt from water before. That tree, the legend says, was a wild tea plant. Whether it happened in 2737 BC exactly, as the stories insist, no serious person can promise you. But archaeology has found tea residue in the tomb of a Han Dynasty emperor buried more than 2,000 years ago, sealed in a wooden box as a treasure worth taking into the afterlife. So hold that thought. Long before tea was a war, long before it was breakfast, it was buried with a king because it was precious enough to want forever. And here's the first thing you have to unlearn. Tea was not a drink. For most of its history, it was medicine, and it was money, and it was sacred, and at various points it was all three at once. In the mountains of what is now Yunnan, tea leaves were steamed, pounded, and pressed into hard bricks, and those bricks did not go into cups. They went into pockets. Compressed tea was currency across huge stretches of Asia, traded for horses along the old tea horse road, carried over passes so high the porters could barely breathe, stamped and valued like coins. In parts of Tibet and Mongolia and Siberia, you could still pay for goods with a brick of tea well into the 20th century. Think about that for a second. A thing you toss into a mug and forget was, for centuries, hard cash you could hold in your hand. A handful of pressed leaves that could buy a war horse. To turn a raw green leaf into something that could survive a journey over the Himalayas without rotting, someone had to solve an impossible problem. A fresh tea leaf begins to break down the moment it is picked. Left alone, it browns, wilts, and turns to slime within a day. The Chinese tea masters learned to interrupt that decay with heat, to fire the leaves, to fix them at the precise moment, to arrest the process that would otherwise destroy them. And by controlling exactly how much the leaf was allowed to change before they stopped it, they invented green tea and oolong, and eventually the fully darkened leaf the West would come to call black tea. They did not have the word oxidation. They had no chemistry, no diagrams of enzymes, no idea what was happening at the level of the cell. But they were controlling oxidation anyway, by feel, by smell, by the color of a leaf in a hot iron pan. Generations before science could explain a single step of what their hands already knew. In the 8th century, a man named Lu Yu wrote it all down in a book called The Classic of Tea, describing the water, the fire, the vessels, the discipline of it, treating a cup of tea as something close to a spiritual act. This was a sophisticated, refined, deeply considered art, while much of the rest of the world was still drinking whatever it could find that wouldn't kill it. That's China's story. It belongs to them, and no one who came later gets to take it. So when tea finally reached Europe in the 1600s, carried west by Dutch and Portuguese traders, you might expect it to have been welcomed as the marvel it was. It was not. It was met with suspicion, mockery, and something close to a moral panic. Because Europe had no idea what to do with it. This bitter foreign brew from the other side of the world, was it a medicine, a poison, a drug? Doctors argued in public. Some declared it a cure for everything from headaches to failing kidneys, prescribing dozens of cups a day. Others warned it would wreck the body. And as tea trickled down from the aristocracy toward ordinary people, the panic sharpened into something with a very familiar smell. It became about class, and about morality, and about the terror of the poor enjoying something. A writer named Jonas Hanway launched a full public assault on tea in the middle of the 1700s, warning that it was destroying the health and the character of the nation, sapping the strength of the working man, ruining the complexions and the nerves of women, breeding idleness and gossip and decay. He genuinely argued that a laboring family drinking tea was a family on the road to ruin. The great writer Samuel Johnson had to publicly defend the drink, cheerfully confessing that he was a hardened and shameless tea drinker who had for years diluted his meals with the infusion of this fascinating plant. Picture that fight for a moment. Grown men in print, waging war over whether a hot drink would morally collapse the country. It sounds absurd now, but underneath the absurdity was a real fear. Because tea was expensive, tea was taxed, and a nation getting hooked on something it could not produce itself was a nation building a very dangerous dependence. They just didn't know yet how dangerous. And into this story, at exactly this point, walks one of the strangest, most audacious men in the entire history of any product on earth. His name was Robert Fortune, and he was a Scottish botanist with a plain face and an unshakable nerve. And in the 1840s, the British East India Company handed him a mission that reads like the plot of a spy film. Britain was drinking tea by the ocean, importing it from China at ruinous expense. And China guarded the secret of how tea was actually grown and processed like a state treasure, because it was one. No foreigner was allowed into the interior, where the tea gardens grew. So the company decided to steal it. Not a chest of it, the whole thing. The plants, the seeds, the knowledge, the entire industry. And they sent Robert Fortune to do it. What he did next is genuinely hard to believe. Fortune shaved the front of his head in the Chinese style, had a long braided queue attached to the back of his own hair, dressed in the robes of a Chinese merchant, and, a tall Scotsman who spoke the language imperfectly at best, traveled deep into forbidden regions of China, posing as an official from a distant province, betting his life that no one would look too closely. He toured tea estates as an honored guest. He watched the masters work. And crucially, he uncovered a secret that stunned Europe. That green tea and black tea were not two different plants, as the West had assumed, but the same plant, processed differently. And he even discovered that some green tea sold to the West had been colored with a mixture that included Prussian blue pigment and gypsum to make it look the shade Western buyers expected. Meaning Europeans had, in some cases, been drinking dyed tea without knowing it. Fortune smuggled out thousands of tea plants and tens of thousands of seeds, using sealed glass cases that let plants survive long sea voyages. And, just as important, he smuggled out the workers, the trained Chinese tea men who actually knew how to make the stuff. He carried the accumulated genius of 1,000 years out of China in disguise, and he planted it in the hills of India. It was one of the largest acts of corporate espionage ever committed, and it worked. A man in a costume and a fake ponytail quietly stole an empire's crown jewel, and almost nobody remembers his name. That theft would matter enormously because it set the stage for what tea did to India. But first we have to go back to the sea turning brown at Humen, and to the darkest chapter this leaf ever wrote. By the early 1800s, Britain had a problem it could not solve with disguises. It was addicted to Chinese tea, buying staggering quantities of it every single year, and China wanted almost nothing Britain had to sell in return. China would take payment in one thing: silver. And so silver flowed east, out of British vaults, in a river that would not stop. And the men who ran the East India Company watched their treasure drain into China with a growing, cold-eyed desperation. They needed something, anything, that the Chinese population would buy in enough volume to reverse the tide. And they found it. They grew it in India, on land they controlled, and they shipped it up the Chinese coast and sold it in defiance of Chinese law. It was opium. This decision seemed reasonable in a company ledger. It was one of the most monstrous decisions ever recorded in one, because it worked exactly as intended, and the human cost of it working is almost impossible to hold in your mind. Millions of people across China fell into addiction. Understand what that means on the ground, away from the trade figures. It means a man in a coastal town who sold his tools, then his furniture, then his home, then his children's future, chasing the smoke. It means a family sitting in an emptying house, watching a father they love disappear into a habit that has hollowed him out from the inside, unable to work, unable to stop, unable to be reached. Whole regions declined. The silver that had flowed into China began flowing back out to pay for the drug, and the Chinese state watched its people and its economy being eaten alive. And it did the thing any responsible government would do. It said no. It sent an official named Lin Zexu to Canton, a man of real integrity, and he seized the opium and destroyed it in those trenches by the sea. The trenches our man on the shore was watching drain into the tide. He even wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, appealing to her conscience, asking how a nation could grow a poison it forbade its own people to touch, and then force it on someone else's. Britain's answer was to send the Navy. This is the part that should make you angry. The wars that followed, the Opium Wars, were not a misunderstanding. They were fought in plain terms to force a country to keep buying a drug that was destroying it, so that Britain could keep paying for its tea. British gunboats, steam-powered and iron-hulled, shelled Chinese coastal forts and cities. The Chinese defenders, brave and hopelessly outgunned, were slaughtered, and when it was over, China was forced to sign treaties that pried open its ports, handed the island of Hong Kong to Britain, and stripped away pieces of its sovereignty. The Chinese would come to call the century that followed the century of humiliation, and its opening blow was struck to protect a trade in leaves. The blight of the addiction, you could argue, was in the drug itself. But the scale of the dying, the deliberate flooding of a nation with poison, and then the shelling of that nation when it resisted, that was not the drug. That was policy. That was a choice made by men in offices, and their names are known. The loudest of them was a Scottish physician turned merchant named William Jardine, a founder of a trading house that grew rich on the opium run. When war fever needed stoking, Jardine went to London and personally lobbied the British government, laying out for the ministers how a war should be fought, which ports should be taken, what should be demanded. He was nicknamed by those who dealt with him the iron-headed old rat for his hardness. And here's the detail that should sit with you. These men were not hiding. They argued for this in correspondence and in the halls of power as a matter of commerce and national interest, coolly, in the language of accounts and obligations. The firm he helped build still exists, one of the great trading houses of Asia, its origins washed clean by time. Sit with that for a moment. An entire war, tens of thousands of deaths, a great civilization brought to its knees. And at the bottom of it, if you keep following the money down, you find a cup of tea and the men who would burn a coastline to keep it cheap. And the tea itself, once Robert Fortune had stolen it into India, wrote its own dark chapter on land. In the hills of Assam, the British cleared jungle and planted the smuggled Chinese tea alongside a native Indian variety. And they built plantations that needed one thing above all: bodies to work them. So they brought in laborers by the hundreds of thousands under a system of indenture, contracts that recruiters sold to the poor and the desperate with lies about the wages and the ease of the work. Once the workers arrived, sometimes carried hundreds of miles from their homes, the truth closed over them. Wages barely existed. Disease tore through the crowded lines of huts. Malaria and cholera killed workers in numbers that the plantation simply absorbed and replaced. Leaving was, in practice, illegal. A worker who ran could be hunted, caught, and punished. Picture one woman, unnamed, bent over a row of bushes on a green Assam hillside in the wet heat, plucking the same two leaves and a bud that Chinese hands had plucked for 1,000 years. Except she is not an artist, and she is not free. She is filling a quota she can never quite meet, for a wage that can never quite feed her, on land that used to be forest, growing a plant that was smuggled out of a country she will never see, so that someone on the other side of the world can have a comforting hot drink at 4 in the afternoon. That was the true cost of the cup. Not the price on the chest, her. And here's the strangest turn of all, the one nobody expects. The same leaf, the same trade, did not only break the empire of China, it helped break the British Empire too, from the other side of the world. Because tea was taxed, and taxes on tea made people furious, and nowhere were they angrier than in Britain's American colonies. When the British government insisted on its right to tax the tea the colonists drank, it lit a fuse. On a December night in 1773, a crowd of colonists, some of them thinly disguised, boarded 3 ships in Boston Harbor and threw the entire cargo of East India Company tea into the sea, 342 chests of it, an amount worth a small fortune, dumped into the harbor in a single night of controlled fury. They didn't burn the ships, they didn't harm the crews, they destroyed the tea, precisely and deliberately, because the tea was the point. The British response was to slam the colonies with punishing laws. The colonies pushed back, and within a few years, the argument that started over a hot drink had become a revolution, and then a new nation. To this day, that harbor full of ruined tea is a founding story of the United States. That's their story now. They claim it every time they tell it. An empire lost its most valuable colony in part over the tax on a leaf, the same leaf, at the very same time that its merchants were about to start a drug war to keep flowing in the other direction. One plant, pulling apart 2 empires at once, from opposite ends of the earth. So let's come back up, out of the wars and the plantations, into the world you actually live in, because the story of tea did not end in blood, and some of what it became will genuinely surprise you. Start with this. After plain water, tea is the most consumed beverage on the entire planet. Not coffee, tea. Human beings drink on the order of billions of cups of it every single day, a number so large it stops meaning anything, so try it this way instead. Right now, as you watch this, more people are drinking tea than are doing almost anything else on Earth. It is the quiet background hum of the whole species. Now, here is a fact that should make you laugh at how fragile history is. The tea bag, that little sachet you drop into a mug without a thought, was, by the most repeated account, an accident. Around the early 1900s, a New York tea merchant named Thomas Sullivan reportedly began sending customers samples of tea in small silk bags, meaning for them to tip the leaves out into the pot. Instead, the customers dropped the whole bag into the water, bag and all, and then wrote back asking for more of these wonderfully convenient pouches. He hadn't invented a product. His customers had invented it for him, by misunderstanding him. The single most common way tea is brewed on Earth may have started as a packaging mix-up that nobody meant to happen. And it goes further than Earth. Tea has been brewed in orbit. Astronauts aboard space stations have had tea rehydrated from pouches, sipped through straws in zero gravity, because even people floating above the planet apparently could not face the day without it. The leaf that Shennong supposedly tasted under a tree nearly 5,000 years ago has now been drunk in outer space. And back down here in Britain, tea became so central to national survival that during the Second World War, the government moved quickly to secure and control the nation's tea supply, storing it in secret locations scattered around the country so that a single bomb could not destroy the stockpile. Because a nation that ran out of tea, the thinking went, might just lose its nerve. Winston Churchill is said to have considered tea more important to his sailors than almost anything. An empire that had gone to war over tea in the East now hid tea in the countryside to keep from losing a war in the West. There's even a fraud angle, because there's always a fraud angle. Remember Robert Fortune discovering that some green tea shipped to the West had been tinted with pigment to please Western eyes? That instinct never died. Tea, being dried, crushed leaves, is one of the easier things in the world to fake or stretch. Bulked out with other leaves, with dust, with color, mislabeled as rarer grades than it is, sold as ancient and single origin when it is neither. To this day, Testing labs regularly find tea on the market that is not entirely, or not at all, what its label claims. The thing you trust most, the plain, honest cup, has a long and ongoing history of being quietly lied about. And through all of it, tea has never stopped being a ritual. It is the Japanese tea ceremony, hundreds of years old, where the making of a single bowl of tea is slowed down into a meditation on the fact that this exact moment, these exact guests, this exact light will never come again. It is the Moroccan pouring of mint tea from a height, the stream of it falling and foaming into a small glass, offered 3 times to a guest as a matter of sacred hospitality. It is a British family putting the kettle on the instant anything goes wrong, as if hot water and leaves could hold a life together, and strangely, sometimes they can. The same plant that funded gunboats also became, everywhere it landed, the drink people reach for to comfort each other. That contradiction is the whole story of tea in a single cup. So think about the man on the shore at Humen one more time. He is standing there in the summer of 1839, watching the sea turn the color of mud, watching 1,000 tons of opium drain away into the tide, and he has been told this is a victory. He does not know that the ships are already coming. He does not know that his empire is about to be broken open and made to bleed for a century. He does not know that a plain-faced Scotsman in a fake ponytail is about to steal the one thing that made his country worth robbing, or that, on the far side of the world, another empire is losing its richest colony over a tax on the very same leaf. He only knows what he can see: brown water and the smell of lime, and the strange conviction that something enormous is ending. He is right that something is ending. He is just wrong about what it is. All of it. The wars, the addiction, the theft, the revolution, the woman bent over the bushes in Assam, the trenches at his feet. All of it grew out of a few dried leaves that people like to steep in hot water. Not gold, not oil, leaves. That is the drink sitting in your kitchen right now. That is the mug you are about to refill. You have been drinking it your whole life, probably, and calling it the most ordinary, comforting, harmless thing in the world, and it is soaked all the way through in silver and blood and smoke and stolen secrets and the sweat of people whose names no one bothered to write down. So the next time the kettle clicks off and you pour the water over the leaves and watch it darken, remember what you are holding. You will never look at a cup of tea the same way again. Before you go, I want to know which part hit you hardest, so drop a comment and tell me which one surprised you most. The Scotsman who shaved his head, wore a fake queue, and smuggled 1,000 years of tea-making secrets out of China? The 342 chests of tea thrown into Boston Harbor that helped ignite a revolution? Or the fact that the humble tea bag in your cupboard was, by the most common account, invented completely by accident? Tell me your pick. If this changed the way you see something as small as a cup of tea, subscribe and stay, because there is another everyday thing on your shelf hiding a story exactly this dark, and it's next.